In today's story, it's the autumn of 1961. 1961. Harold Macmillan's Britain is enjoying an economic boom. Living standards are rising faster than they had in decades, and the motorways are opening up a new world of high-speed travel. Into this optimistic moment, the British Motor Corporation introduces the Austin Westminster A110, a car that promised to deliver 102 miles per hour, genuine six-cylinder refinement, and room for 5 adults, all for just under £1,200. The early 1960s represented a unique moment in British automotive history. The scars of post-war austerity were finally fading. The standard work week had just been reduced from 48 to 42 hours, and a new managerial class was emerging with money to spend and miles to cover. These weren't the old landed gentry who bought Bentleys and Rolls-Royces. These were the new men factory managers, company directors, successful businessmen who'd climbed the ladder through talent rather than inheritance. They needed cars that projected success without ostentation, that could cruise the new M1 motorway and still park respectably outside the office. The Austin Westminster A110 was BMC's answer to this demand. Built on the bones of the Pininfarina-designed A99, it shared Italian styling sensibilities with a decidedly British character. Those modest tail fins whispered of American influence, but the overall package remained restrained, dignified, proper. This was a car for men who'd served in the war, who remembered rationing, and who understood that true class didn't need to shout. But here's the fascinating paradox. Despite offering impressive performance, genuine quality, and competitive pricing, the Westminster A110 would be dead by early 1968. Just 7 years from introduction to extinction. What went wrong? Why did a car that Motorsport magazine called an impressive automobile disappear while its rivals soldiered on? That's the story we're diving into today, a tale of British automotive ambition, market forces, and the brutal realities of competing in a rapidly evolving marketplace. Topic 1. The engineering reality behind the 102. Let's talk about that top speed claim, because for experienced drivers of the era, it wasn't just a number, it was a statement of intent. 102 miles per hour in 1961 meant genuine motorway credibility. This wasn't some optimistic factory claim whispered under ideal conditions. Period road tests consistently verified it. The heart of the Westminster A110 was BMC's C-Series straight-six engine, displacing 2.912 litres or 177.7 cubic inches, if you're thinking in American terms. This engine produced 120 brake horsepower at 4,750 revolutions per minute, with 163 pounds-feet of torque, arriving at just 2,750 revolutions. Those aren't earth-shattering figures by today's standards, but in the context of early 1960s British executive cars, they told an interesting story. The C-Series engine had racing pedigree. This same basic design powered the Austin Healey 3000 sports car, and BMC deliberately borrowed from that experience when uprating the A110. The cylinder head came straight from Healey development, featuring revised combustion chambers and a more aggressive camshaft profile. Twin SU-HS4 carburetors fed the engine, and crucially, a dual-bore exhaust system helped it breathe properly at higher revolutions. This wasn't just a detuned lorry engine, this was a genuine performance unit adapted for executive duty. What made the Westminster's performance particularly impressive was how it delivered that speed. The 0 to 60 miles per hour time of 13.3 seconds wasn't spectacular. A Jaguar Mark II 3.8 would humiliate it off the line. But once rolling, that smooth six-cylinder engine would pull strongly from 2,000 revolutions right through to 5,000, making overtaking on two-lane roads confident and relaxed. The Borg-Warner overdrive, standard equipment on early models, meant that at 70 miles per hour on the motorway, the engine was barely working, turning at a lazy 3,000 revolutions. The 3-speed manual gearbox, with overdrive functioning on second and third gears, gave effectively 5 ratios to work with. Yes, you read that correctly, 3-speed. By 1961, this was already looking a bit agricultural compared to Jaguar's 4-speed Moss gearbox, but BMC's logic was simple. The engine had enough torque to make close ratios unnecessary, and the overdrive provided the cruising flexibility needed for motorway work. The Mark II version, introduced in May 1964, addressed this with a 4-speed gearbox borrowed from the Austin Healey 3000. However, in typical BMC penny-pinching fashion, it lacked synchromesh on first gear, which meant you either had to be rolling or execute a proper double declutch if you needed to engage first after stopping. Overdrive became optional rather than standard, a cost-cutting measure that diminished the car's appeal. Topic 2. The price positioning puzzle. Now, let's address the pricing situation, because this is where the Westminster A110's market position becomes really interesting. When the A110 launched in late 1961, it carried a price tag of £1,197, 5 shillings and 3 pence. By May 1964, when the Mark II version arrived, BMC offered 2 variants, a basic saloon priced under £1,000 and a super deluxe that maintained the previous specification levels. To understand what this meant in the marketplace, we need context. The Vauxhall Cresta PB, introduced at the 1962 London Motor Show, cost £822 for the base Velox, with the top-spec Cresta adding £94, 13 shillings and 4 pence. The Ford Zodiac Mark III occupied similar territory. These were the Westminster's direct competitors, large, 6-cylinder executive saloons for the ambitious middle manager. But here's where it gets interesting. The Jaguar Mark II 3.4 with automatic transmission, as tested by the Motor Magazine in 1961, cost £1,951, including taxes. That's approximately £750 more than the Westminster, not an insignificant sum when you consider the average annual wage for a skilled worker was around £1,000. So the Westminster offered roughly 60% of a Jaguar's cost, with 80% of the performance and arguably more room. On paper, it should have been an unbeatable value proposition. Motor Magazine called it outstanding value for money, both to buy and run. Autocar praised it as eminently suitable as executive transport. Yet sales remained modest, with just 26,105 A110s built over the entire 7-year production run, both Mark I and Mark II combined. Compare that to the smaller Austin Cambridge, which sold in far greater numbers despite being less prestigious. Or consider that the sporty Jaguar Mark II 3.8 sold roughly 25,000 units in a similar time frame, despite costing significantly more. The harsh reality was that buyers at this price point were aspirational. They weren't making purely rational economic decisions. Topic 3. The Pininfarina styling dilemma. The Westminster A110 wore bodywork designed by Pininfarina, the legendary Italian coach builder who'd created some of the most beautiful Ferraris and Alfa Romeos of the era. You'd think this would be a major selling point, yet it became something of a mixed blessing. The Farina styling, as it became known among BMC enthusiasts, first appeared on the Austin A99 in 1959. It was modern, angular, and incorporated small tail fins that nodded to American influence while maintaining European restraint. The problem? Pininfarina was nothing if not efficient at amortizing his design work. Look at a Westminster A110 from the front, and you'll notice it bears a striking resemblance to the Peugeot 404. Same basic grille shape, similar headlamp arrangement, comparable overall proportions. Pininfarina had recycled themes across multiple clients. This wasn't necessarily visible to the average buyer, but it created a subtle problem of identity. The Westminster didn't look particularly British in the way a Rover P5 or Humber Super Snipe did, yet it wasn't continental enough to be exotic. Those little tail fins, which seemed daring in 1959, looked increasingly dated by the mid-1960s. Especially after the Rover P6 and Triumph 2000 introduced a new aesthetic of clean, modernist design in 1963. The A110 Mark II launched in 1964, attempted to address this with a revised grille featuring anodized aluminum mesh on the basic model, though the Super Deluxe retained more traditional brightwork. Road wheels shrank from 14 inches to 13 inches in diameter, reducing unsprung weight by about 10 pounds per corner and lowering the car by 6/10 of an inch. These changes improved handling, but they didn't fundamentally alter the car's visual identity. Inside, the story was better. The Super Deluxe Westminster featured walnut veneered dashboard and door cappings, leather seat facings, reclining front seats, and even folding picnic tables for rear passengers. This was genuinely luxurious equipment for 1964, matching or exceeding what you'd find in considerably more expensive cars. The basic saloon, introduced to hit that under £1,000 price point, stripped away these niceties, offering leathercloth seats, simpler trim, and rubber floor mats. It was a calculated move to compete on price, but it diluted the Westminster's premium positioning. Topic 4. The competition tightens. By the mid-1960s, the Westminster faced a two-pronged assault that would prove fatal. From above, Jaguar continued to dominate the prestige market with the Mark II, which, despite its higher price, offered genuine 120 miles per hour performance from the 3.8 version and a level of refinement that BMC simply couldn't match. The Westminster's 102 miles per hour was respectable, but it wasn't in the same league. More damagingly, a new generation of smaller, more modern executive cars emerged that fundamentally changed the market. The Rover P6, introduced in 1963, and the Triumph 2000, launched the same year, represented a completely different philosophy. These cars were smaller, lighter, and more efficient, yet they offered similar interior space through clever packaging. They featured cutting-edge styling that made the Westminster's Pininfarina bodywork look decidedly old-fashioned. And crucially, they appealed to younger executives who saw themselves as progressive and forward-thinking. The Rover 2000, with its de Dion rear suspension and light alloy body panels, was technically sophisticated in a way that made the Westminster's conventional leaf-spring rear axle seem antiquated. The Triumph 2000 offered rack and pinion steering and a four-wheel independent suspension that delivered handling the bigger Westminster couldn't approach. These weren't just smaller alternatives, they represented the future. BMC's response to this threat was the Austin 3-litre, introduced at the 1967 London Motor Show to replace the Westminster. It was a disaster. Styled in-house rather than by Pininfarina, it featured hydroelastic suspension and a longer, heavier body. Most damningly, it was ugly, and automotive historians agree on this point almost universally. The 3-litre lasted just until 1971, with only 9,898 built. It confirmed what many had suspected. BMC had lost its way in the executive car market. Topic 5. The driving experience and ownership reality. For those who actually owned and drove Westminster A110s, the experience was rather different from the marketplace positioning might suggest. Owners consistently praised the car's refinement and build quality. That big C-Series 6 was smooth and quiet, with just a hint of the Austin Healey growl when extended. The ride quality, using conventional coil springs at the front and leaf springs at the rear, was supple without being wallowy. The car felt substantial, well-damped, and confidence-inspiring on long motorway runs. The brakes deserve special mention. 10.75-inch front discs with drums at the rear, all power-assisted, provided stopping power that contemporary road tests described as excellent for the era. This was crucial given the car's performance potential. 102 miles per hour requires proper brakes, and the Westminster delivered them. However, ownership had its challenges. The dynamo, rather than an alternator, provided marginal electrical output, which became problematic when using lights, heater, and wipers simultaneously. Night driving in heavy rain could be genuinely challenging as the electrical system struggled to keep up. The wipers themselves were single-speed and not particularly effective, compounding the problem. The 3-speed manual gearbox, while robust, required acclimatization. The column-mounted gear lever on early models felt vague compared to the floor-mounted shifter, introduced with the A110. Even the Mark II's four-speed transmission, lacking synchro mesh on first gear, demanded driving skills that were rapidly becoming obsolete as fully synchronized gearboxes became standard across the industry. Fuel consumption hovered around 19 miles per imperial gallon in mixed use, not terrible for a 3-liter six-cylinder car capable of genuine high-speed cruising, but neither was it economical. The smaller Rover 2000 and Triumph 2000 could match or exceed 25 miles per gallon, while offering similar performance. Topic 6. The British Motor Corporation's broader problems. To understand why the Westminster A110 died in 1968, we need to step back and look at BMC's larger corporate dysfunction. The company resulted from the 1952 merger of Austin and Morris, and it never fully resolved the internal rivalries and redundancies this created. By the mid-1960s, BMC was producing too many badge-engineered variants of essentially the same cars, fragmenting its marketing and confusing customers. The Westminster platform alone spawned multiple variants: the Austin A110 Westminster, the Wolseley 6/110, mechanically identical but with different nose styling, and the Vanden Plas Princess Mark II, which used the same body shell with luxury trim. The most exotic variant was the Vanden Plas Princess 4-liter R, fitted with a Rolls-Royce F-head straight-six engine, the only civilian mass-produced car with a Rolls-Royce engine that wasn't actually a Rolls-Royce or Bentley. This badge engineering strategy looked efficient on paper, but created market confusion. Why would someone buy an Austin Westminster when they could have a Wolseley 6/110 with slightly more power and perceived greater prestige for a modest premium? And if you were stretching to Wolseley money, why not stretch a bit further to Jaguar territory? BMC's financial situation deteriorated through the 1960s. The company lost money in 1964, 1965, and 1966. Management seemed unable to rationalize the model range or invest adequately in new product development. When the company merged with Jaguar in 1966 to form British Motor Holdings, and then merged again with Leyland Motors in 1968 to create British Leyland, the Westminster was an obvious casualty. The Austin 3-liter replacement, already in development when these mergers occurred, became a symbol of BMC's problems. Leyland management reportedly allowed it to reach production largely to demonstrate publicly how badly BMC had lost its way, justifying the takeover and subsequent reorganization. Topic 7. The market segment's transformation. By 1968, when Westminster production ceased, the entire large six-cylinder executive saloon segment was under pressure. The Vauxhall Cresta and Ford Zodiac continued, but their glory days were behind them. The future belonged to smaller, lighter, more efficient executive cars like the Rover P6 and Triumph 2000, or to genuine luxury makes like Jaguar that could justify their premium pricing through superior refinement and performance. The social context had shifted as well. The rigid hierarchies of the 1950s and early 60s were giving way to a more meritocratic, youth-oriented culture. Young executives in 1968 wanted something different from what their fathers had driven. They wanted innovation, style, and continental sophistication. The Westminster, despite its Pininfarina pedigree, felt increasingly like a car for an older generation. Technological advancement also played a role. By the late 60s, alternators were replacing dynamos, fully synchronized 4-speed and 5-speed gearboxes were becoming standard, and safety features like collapsible steering columns were emerging. The Westminster, based on engineering from the late 1950s, couldn't easily accommodate these improvements without fundamental redesign. Perhaps most importantly, the economics of the British car industry were changing. Production volumes needed to justify tooling costs kept increasing, yet the market for large executive saloons was fragmenting. Companies that couldn't achieve scale in specific segments found themselves unable to compete profitably. BMC's attempt to be everything to everyone across too many brands and models meant it achieved scale in nothing. Topic 8. The Westminster's Competition Department Service. One fascinating footnote in the Westminster A110 story involves its use by the BMC Competitions Department as chase and mechanics vehicles. The department even had a limited number of estate versions built, though these were rare. The A110's combination of space, performance, and reliability made it ideal for following rally cars through European stages or transporting mechanics and equipment. Derek Astle and Mike Sutcliffe actually entered a Westminster A110 in the 1962 Monte Carlo Rally with Robert Glenton from the Sunday Express along for the ride. The car failed to finish after Glenton reportedly drove it through a wall when the brakes overheated on a descent. This incident highlighted a fundamental issue. While the Westminster had good brakes for road use, they weren't designed for the sustained hard use of competition driving. Nevertheless, these competition department cars demonstrated what the Westminster could do when properly maintained and driven with purpose. They covered huge distances across terrible roads, carrying heavy loads, and generally proved reliable. It's a testament to the basic soundness of the engineering, even if the final product never quite achieved the commercial success BMC hoped for. Topic 9. The survival rate and classic status. Today, Austin Westminster A110s are genuinely rare. Many fell victim to corrosion. The unitary construction bodywork was vulnerable to rust, particularly in the sills, floors, and rear wheel arches. In the 1970s and 80s, when values were low, many were unceremoniously destroyed in banger racing, that peculiarly British form of automotive Viking funeral, where large saloons were deliberately crashed in stadiums for entertainment. Of the 26,105 A110s built, only a few hundred are believed to survive worldwide. The Cambridge-Oxford Owners Club maintains a register, but these are not common cars at shows or rallies. They're overshadowed by their more famous siblings, the smaller Austin Cambridge and the sports Austin Healey models that shared engines. Values remain modest compared to Jaguars or Rovers of the same era. A good Westminster A110 Mark II Super Deluxe might fetch £15,000 to £20,000 in today's market, while a comparable Jaguar Mark II 3.8 would command £40,000 to £60,000 or more. This price differential reflects both rarity and desirability. The Jaguar has achieved icon status, while the Westminster remains a connoisseur's choice. For those willing to look past the lack of glamour, the Westminster offers a genuine slice of early 1960s British motoring. That smooth C-Series 6, the substantial build quality, and the period styling all evoke an era when British manufacturers still believed they could compete across all market segments. The fact that they ultimately couldn't makes cars like the Westminster all the more poignant. The Austin Westminster A110 promised much: 102 miles per hour performance, 6-cylinder refinement, genuine quality, and competitive pricing. On technical merit alone, it should have succeeded. Motor Magazine praised it as outstanding value. Autocar called it eminently suitable for executive transport. Motorsport admired its performance. Yet by early 1968, just 7 years after introduction, it was dead. The reasons for this failure weren't simple. The car itself was fundamentally sound, that C-Series engine was excellent, the build quality was good, and the specification was generous. But the Westminster fell victim to multiple forces: market segmentation, badge engineering confusion, BMC's broader corporate dysfunction, and the emergence of a new generation of smaller, more modern executive cars that redefined the segment. Perhaps most tellingly, the Westminster represented an old way of thinking about executive cars: large, conventional, dignified. By the mid-1960s, buyers wanted innovation and style. They wanted Rover's sophisticated engineering or Jaguar's racing pedigree. The Westminster, for all its genuine merits, couldn't provide that emotional appeal. If you owned or drove a Westminster A110, we'd love to hear your experiences. Were the electrical problems as bad as the period reviews suggested? Did that Big Six live up to its Austin Healey heritage? How did it compare to the Vauxhalls and Fords you might have cross-shopped? Share your memories in the comments below. This was a car that deserved better than history gave it, and your stories help preserve its legacy. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the Westminster A110 story, please consider subscribing to our channel. We focus on the cars that time forgot, the nearly great, and the genuinely interesting that get overlooked in favor of the usual suspects. Hit that like button if you appreciate detailed, factual automotive history, and let us know in the comments what other forgotten British classics you'd like us to cover. Thank you for watching. Remember, the most interesting automotive stories aren't always about the cars that succeeded. Sometimes they're about the ones that tried and what their failures tell us about their times. The Austin Westminster A110 was 102 miles per hour of ambition that ended up roadkill on the motorway of progress. But for those 7 years, it gave middle management Britain a genuine taste of executive motoring, and that's worth remembering.